My name is Pádraic E. Moore, and I was invited to lead this interview this evening with Stephen Loughman, whose exhibition this is, Our Elaborate Plans. The conversation is going to last about 35 minutes, and then I'm going to encourage all of you to join us in some questions, some conversations. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Kevin Kavanagh's contribution. It struck me that he has been operating now for 3 decades, that's 30 years. So I think we should begin by applauding Kevin. So, just to start with the beginning and the title, which is obviously a Doors reference.
Yeah.
And I spent my teenage years listening to far too much of that Doors album, The Doors, which ends with that song, The End, from which the title Our Elaborate Plans is taken. And I suppose appropriation is a crucial part of your strategy in general.
Yeah, yeah.
And before we talk about what that means, maybe we can talk about what all of these images are in terms of where they come from. Would you like to give us a breakdown of the source?
The actual cinema sources.
I think it's useful to think about.
Yeah, I mean, if you go around the room, this is from The Thin Red Line, which is a World War II film. This is from Metropolis, which is, you know, the black and white film. This is from The Day After, which is a nuclear Holocaust film. This is from The Ritual, which is a horror film, a kind of camping trip that goes wrong. This is from The Last of Us. Mission Impossible, the first one with Tom Cruise. The Planet Earth Gone Black is from the film Yesterday, which is about the guy who falls off his bike and injures himself, and he's the only one who remembers who the Beatles are. And this is from Dr. Zhivago.
That one there with the found frame.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about it the other day, I thought it was Vladimir Tatlin's monument to the Third International. I don't know if you know that sculpture that Tatlin made.
Yeah,
it's actually Babel's tower, the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because it came from the Deco kind of period. I think it may have had a little touch of it in the design, you know. But no, it's meant to be the Tower of Babel. I just wanted to provoke a conversation between an Oriental-styled frame and the notion of Babel and the lack of communication and things like that. But also the title comes from, it's the German phrase fremde Hände, which means foreign hands. So that brings another aspect to it. And titling it in German brings another aspect to it. It becomes a little Tower of Babel of its own in terms of cross-cultural references and things like that.
But the choice and the reference of Babel, I suppose, having quite apocalyptic and end times.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's in the show, yeah.
It's throughout the work,
yeah.
And I know when I wrote a short text for you in 2021. What was the title of that show?
Oh, now you got me. 3 years later.
3 years later.
Yeah.
And the image for that was a image that was taken from the Andromeda effect. Is that what it was called?
Which one is that?
In the film where a flu travels across the Europe.
Oh, yes, it was from the, what's it called?
The Cassandra Crossing,
that's
you.
it, yeah.
And so the still that was from that is that great scene where the train
Yeah, it's
crashes.
actually a model.
And so that film also had these kind of connotations of
Yeah, I mean, I like that
dystopia.
because it kind of fits in with the way people are acting now in the way that there's a kind of a psychosis about, you know, the world coming to an end and, you know, nature deteriorating and all that. So I think there's a general kind of mass psychosis that's going on in the world at the moment.
I think the millenarian mindset has always been around.
Yeah. I mean, it was in Egyptian times.
And maybe it just leads to quite good art.
Yeah. I think you can hop on that and make good images.
I mean, Hieronymus Bosch was doing that too.
Yeah. But that's where most of the stuff comes from, is a kind of a darker aspect, or else it's just used like the Mission Impossible thing, where it's simply a knife falling. I like the idea of it, and I like the phrase "I've lost control," which is used in the film. All the titles come from the film, and I just like the idea of a falling knife and the lack of control.
And there is this uncanniness to all the images too. There's an unsettling quality, which sometimes, as you said, is incidental.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had that. Even if I do what to my mind is an ordinary landscape, people pick up on something uncanny about it. And that's just, it's something I have. I don't know where it comes from. It's not purposeful, but it just comes out in the work. So it's not planned or staged. It just comes out of, I guess, my style. My optician told me of a flaw in my eye, so maybe that makes things look different.
Well, I suppose uncanny images are inherently disruptive images, aren't they? Because when you see them, they have the potential to unnerve or disturb.
Yeah, well,
and that creates an interruption in the flow.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I'm taking like some films. I mean, some of the imagery is violent, but some of it's not. For instance, the swing. But in actual fact, in the film, that's 5 seconds before the bomb is dropped.
Yeah.
And somebody I know was talking to me about that was filled with dread, but I didn't mean to fill it with dread, but apparently to them it is. And that's something I can't control.
That film is the American counterpart to Threads.
Yeah.
Which, if anyone in the audience hasn't seen Threads, I recommend that you watch it. It's a 1983 film, maybe it's a BBC film.
Yeah, it's
made
terrifying.
really sort of like public service broadcasting in an anti-nuclear mindset, a bit like Protect and Survive, but it goes through the kind of fallout, literally, of, I think, Sheffield post-nuclear attack. And it gets very, very dystopian, but at the end, it kind of cuts to 20 years in advance when society has started to form their own kind of language, etc. So there is this kind of... You also, I know we were talking about these type of dated TV series, which you can now find on YouTube. You have a penchant for this type of material.
Yeah, I love, like at the moment I'm looking at, you know, the series UFO, which was set in the, I think it was late 60s, early 70s.
I don't know that.
Yeah, with Ed Bishop with a blonde wig. Yeah, it was set in 1990.
Okay.
But it's about a secret battle going on against UFO invaders. And it's all Jerry Anderson models. Again, I like model work. I like working from images that are, you know, specifically created for the movie. So they have an unearthly feel anyway to begin with. So I'm looking at stuff from that at the moment.
You did mention also that you know, these images that you've selected have generally been created by teams.
Yeah,
of
by
people.
somebody else. Yeah, or groups of people. Yeah.
So you are taking these very constructed and contrived images and then folding them back in.
Yeah.
To a different kind of vocabulary.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's where I see myself, is like that I'm in this kind of technological world, and I pick out bits of it and just make my own story, as it were. Although it's a bit skewed, the narrative on it, so it doesn't necessarily, you know, there's no direct flow of narrative. It's just kind of one bit here, one bit there. That's the way I see it. Like this, for instance, which I wanted to do digitally, just because I wanted a digital aspect in the show. This was suggested to me by a game I play called Framed. It's like Wordle, but they show you a frame of a film and you have to get the film. And this came up.
Detail. Okay.
Yeah, it's just small.
Right.
And this came up, and I loved the image. So it was suggested to me by an algorithm, or, you know, whatever the film of the day was on this quiz. And so that's somehow how things come to me. But as well, I can imagine like the explosives guy rigging this up, this whole landscape, and, you know. But then when you bring it into a painting or a drawing like this, it just deadens it and it becomes something else. And the title is Children, which is a line in the film where the guy, his troops are getting attacked, and he looks around and sees some of them are only boys, and he says children. And, you know, it still has ramifications. The word children is on the news a lot these days for what's going on in the world.
Well, I suppose you often, your work although it is extracted from fiction, it often is in response to what you might call hard news.
Yeah, yeah, very much so, yeah. Yeah, that sometimes will drive me to do a specific piece.
In the past, sometimes I've seen your work, actually I saw it described in an auction house catalogue as photoreal, which I found very...
Shit, yeah.
Exactly, that's what I want to get at. Because when you look at the images closely...
They're not photorealistic
No, and
at all.
in fact, your hand is very evident.
In fact, I leave in mistakes sometimes. I mean, the background of that particular one, by some standards, some people would probably call it crude, but it works for me in the you know, I mean, I could imagine some photorealistic nerd with airbrushes trying to make it exactly.
Well, I think there's also maybe, you could say there's a naive quality to some of the
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, my final year show in NCAD, I took on a naive painting caricature and did the final year show as a naive painter. But I always had a kind of I call it quirky style, that, you know, it's not exact. Again, we go back to the flaw in my eye, probably, but it's not academia, but it still has something for me.
Well, I suppose the intention is not merely to reproduce, but to interrupt the process, and then it gets folded back into images.
Yeah, I mean, you spend a lot of time looking at these when you're doing them, you know, so you begin to think a lot about the image. And you discard stuff. I've gone like 99% of the way and realized that something isn't working. But usually it doesn't work in juxtaposition with others, because I usually start with about 2 paintings and then the show begins to progress. But yeah, you can tell when something's not going to work in some places.
You said to me, we were talking about appropriation, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting that you referred to, and I haven't seen these paintings, but it's a body of work of Women's Institute postcards that you made.
Yeah, I like taking things remotely, and I used to go to car booths and find these Women's Institute photographs, which are kind of idealized photographs of England, like the village ponds and things like that. And so I decided I wanted to transcribe them as if I was looking through a conservative viewpoint, as a portrait of England, as it were, or a skewed portrait of England. And so I began working on a series of them. And then Brexit happened, and then it took on a different meaning. But at the time, I was just thinking about a conservative viewpoint. But history intervened, and I think some of I don't think it went down that well, that show, but it got some reviews, and they all mentioned Brexit in it. But
I suppose that speaks of the power of an image to hold a kind of meta information which can accumulate over time, which isn't there in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it's like why art historians refer to an image in the meaning becomes apparent. Like, you know, Caravaggio post-war became important because people had seen dead people and violence, and, you know.
It, of course, has a new connotation in an age where the destruction of images has become a strategy once again.
Yeah.
Art historians would say that it's better to maybe deface than to destroy completely.
Yeah.
You mentioned Elaine Sturtevant as a source or a figure who you found interesting. For those of you who don't know, you could maybe imagine her as an early Sherry Levine in that she's taking found images, or let's say
she recreated artist work.
Like Duchamp, for example, Warhol possibly.
Warhol, yeah.
And was doing it at the same time as Warhol.
Her work actually is selling for really huge prices now.
It is.
To people who don't know the difference. Anyway, I don't know.
But I suppose, I mean, the reason we were discussing her opus was to do with the notion of an image holding its own inherent
I thought
power.
what was interesting about her was you'd imagine she has a very cold kind of clinical practice, but she talked about an energy coming off these pieces, and that was why she chose them. And I thought that was interesting. And in the same way, there is something that sparks, like it could be a moment of drama in the film that sparks my interest. It could be an emotional moment, or it could just be a visual, thing that I see. But sometimes, like for instance, the title "Children" leapt out at me for this because of the emotional moment in the film. Like I could tell you about, like I did a painting of a still life of flowers, which is they're gladioli, but it's actually, it was from the last show, it's a round painting. It's actually taken from Hitchcock's Marnie, where she sees the flowers and the color red provokes a fear in her. And I titled it National Treasure, which is what one of the old guys in the office says about her hiding her legs, like there's some national treasure. So unless you know this is like an essay in misogyny, because if you take in the trauma of what happens between her and Sean Connery in the film, it becomes a totally different, it looks quite benign, a bunch of flowers, but it becomes something totally different when you add the two together, you know, and the story of the film.
Hitchcock crops up quite a lot in your work, and
Yeah.
when I was asking you about the kind of the lineage that you were relating to, we were talking about the idea of kind of procedural painting or photography being a source for you, and I was kind of thinking that in the 80s it would have been for you looking at like Sigmar Polke or Richter or people who'd already been around for a while, but you said that actually there was a group of painters in Dublin. Can you remember?
And video, they did video as well.
What were they called?
You know, it's been a while now, but they collectively, we used to call them Of Desire.
Desire.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they're all blown to the four winds now.
You
the only one I
mentioned-
know is practicing is Michael Arbuckle. But they were, to me, that when I was in college, they were like what I wanted to be.
Yeah. And what were they making?
Masses of stuff. They were really productive. They were making mass media imagery. They used Nazi imagery. They used everything, pop imagery. They made videos. They held happenings. And it was just full of energy.
And this is 85, 86?
Yeah, when I think I was there 82 to 87.
And you said that in response to their work, one of your first works was something like 24 images of...
There was a silk screen of Anthony Perkins doing that, you know, the famous Psycho.
From Psycho.
Yeah, and it was called 1 Second Portrait. It was 24 images of same image.
Repeated.
Which is like what Douglas Gordon did he slowed it down, but I just did but I've always been wall-based, you know, I always wanted to do stuff wall-based. I don't know why. I never got into video.
So that was, just to go into, I think it's always interesting to talk about biography a little bit.
Yeah.
So you went to NCAD from what years? 82 to
82 to 87.
Okay.
And at that time, everything, well, the neo-expressionism was the dominant thing. That's why it's funny you mentioned Polka. I never really got him. You know, I never really understood him. Somebody like, do you remember Robert Longo did those drawings, the pencil drawings of people falling?
Yeah.
They much more rang true with me at that time. That was the kind of thing I was interested in. But again, they...
Falling or dancing, I guess, is different.
Yeah. It's like...
I mean, they became falling men after 9/11, but I think before that, it was people...
Did somebody actually make that comparison? That's a rather crude...
I think some of those paintings are also lost in the Twin Towers, but then they became also fused with American Psycho because in the film, Patrick Bateman has several of them in his apartment.
I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, these are all the intertextual things. But to go back to your biography, so would you say that Psycho reproduction was one of the first things you can remember making?
It's one of the first things I remember having, I thought was good.
Do you still have it?
No, it's gone. I think I've one print left somewhere, but I don't know where. But after college, I didn't really do much. I kind of drifted around. I was still working as a painter, like working on film sets and stuff like that, and the occasional group show, but I didn't have a first one-man show till 98. So that was quite a long gap.
Was that with this gallery?
Yeah, Kevin's original incarnation, which was Joe Rain Gallery.
Yeah.
On Anglesey Street, wasn't it? Yeah. So it was a long gap between...
Because one of the things I was very interested in when we were having a conversation before is your memory of particular episodes of Irish visual, cultural kind of life.
Yeah.
And you told me that you also were working initially in the Caldwell Gallery.
Yes, yeah.
And then,
I worked with Charlie Brady's wife, Ela.
and then were you working with Curlin for a while?
I just served wine at the Curlin.
Well, that's part of the cultural...
But they were like just starting then. It was really funny. You know, where they are now, it's like blue chip.
But I think it speaks of an important presence and a observational quality.
I mean, I wouldn't have been necessarily working at the time. I always remember Charlie Brady used to big me up saying I was one of the best painters around. And I hadn't done anything. Like, I probably hadn't even set foot in the studio, but he'd still say it, you know? So I suppose I still kept my oar in that way. But it was gradually then I just started to work. A friend of mine, he had a house in Capel Street, and I got a room there, and I just started to work. And then in those days, it was probably easier. The work began to get people involved, and word of mouth, and you know. Then Kevin asked me to do a show. Actually, I'd been in a group show with Kevin, a still life show, which was a still life based on Hitchcock. And then we decided to do a solo show.
Now, the reason I point to these kind of moments is because, you know, making and showing art is a fundamentally social event that we all contribute to. And I feel that like an exhibition, when you present your work, is people remember it. It also creates a kind of moment or a happening of its own.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for quite a long time. You've witnessed.
I mean, I'd like to remember when my first show with Kevin, there was a huge crowd. I remember it was really big. And I remember we sold a piece for $1.5 grand, and we were chuffed. We were absolutely chuffed that we had sold something. But I don't remember being nervous or anything about it. But, you know, the French idea of exposing, like I'm kind of an old hand at it now. I suppose, you know, if you have faith in what you do, then you shouldn't be that worried about it.
I mean, it's very easy when you talk about appropriation and finding images and using other people's images that it can become quite like deflective or that you are avoiding something. But having spoken to you, I often feel that possibly these are quite insightful images I mean, I won't say a form of self-portraiture, but I guess the choice of images that you are making.
I'm in this, you know, in this whole thing. This is, but it's not a simple reactive thing. It's more, it's kind of, I'm immersed in it. But it is down to me. I select the images, you know, and so it is in that way. It's a portrait of me, I suppose. And
so one of the things that also I remember we met for coffee when you were visiting Antwerp, and we had coffee near the flea market in Brussels, where I suppose you were probably finding
more rubbish.
Yeah. But the reason you were there is because you were coming to look at some of you're on your way to Antwerp to look at some.
It was the new National Gallery.
The Royal Museum.
The Royal, on Leopold de Valplatz. But I'd been there before when it was free to go in, as far as I remember. But this time around, they'd made it more kind of Instagram friendly with giant models made from the paintings, and they've got a giant revolving hand and thing there, you know, from images from the paintings.
Yeah.
So I was going there, but I think you wanted to tie it in with, I had an interest in Dutch painting.
Well, that was what I was kind of getting at, was just that you do have an interest in also much more classical forms of art.
I always loved Dutch painting. Like even when I was a student, if you wanted a bit of inspiration, I just went to the National Gallery to look at the Dutch room there, and it just gave me something. And I think the tone of them is in some of my work as well.
The gloom.
Yeah. I think that one it wasn't a Rembrandt, and then it was a Rembrandt. The guy's playing the game in the dark. What's it called? I can't remember the name of it. But it's recently been, they say now it is a Rembrandt. Something like that, or the Flight Out of Egypt, that kind of gloom and the little fire in the distance. Stuff like that, or Jan Levens' portrait of what I think is Rembrandt's father. It's a bald man. He looks really like Rembrandt's father. So that kind of stuff I really liked. And I'd study it for ages, so just to you get techniques as well just by looking at it, like glazing and stuff like that.
So you would have been going into the National Gallery in the 80s looking at these
Yeah,
paintings?
I still do sometimes.
Yeah. The difference, of course, being that you don't have any people in your paintings.
No. But it was something I began with, and I liked the effect of it. That in a weird way, people are in them, but they're not. It's like somebody's just walked out of the scene or something like that. But I have painted people before, but I just think it speaks better without them. They're a bit of a distraction. And as well, if you think about action in a film, I'm not really interested in action. It's just the image. And so if you bring people into it, then it brings another reading into it in some way. It's the mise en scène, or they're essentially landscapes that I'm looking at, and still lives in some cases.
But I was thinking about it, I don't know if you remember during kind of the plague years when everyone started circulating De Chirico pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Because they suddenly resembled the kind of emptiness of all the streets. And
But I loved it. I loved lockdown. We used to go to the studio because we were in town. I live in town, and it was like being in a science fiction film. I thought it was fantastic.
It does give these paintings a different poignance, particularly, like the swing and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of, just to talk a little bit about the folding of these images back into technology, social media, Instagram, what is your relationship with the images that are here and are very hand-hewn, circulating back in an inherently flattening way?
Well, I don't think Instagram's the best place to put work up on anyway. I don't think it's a good venue for painting. Painting should be viewed, you know. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, but I would like the fall of images to read in a kind of similar way to flicking your screen. But at the end of the day, they're paintings and they should be seen.
Because there is a desire to create effect. I mean, I didn't realize until I saw this in the flesh today that painting has luminous paint on the back that you can't really see in the
No,
stills.
you wouldn't see it. And in fact, I sold one to the OPW and they reframed it so you can't actually see it at all on it now. But it was always the pure paint. It's paint that gives it that glow.
Yeah.
I always liked that idea. And I did it with a few paintings. But it's essentially fluorescent paint painted on the back, and then it gives this kind of eerie glow.
Because the woods also have metallic paint on them. This one over here.
Yeah, they're called interference paints by Williamsburg. So I like that kind of effect as well.
Well, they don't photograph well, so you're actually creating images that inherently will only be experienced to their optimum in person.
Yeah.
That's kind of inbuilt into the image, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it is. They are paintings of filmed images, so you have to see them. You can't. Otherwise, I'd just be using the stills, you know.
Do you think that, is there something, you know, the idea of the archetype, that there's kind of symbols within the human consciousness that are universal, that there are certain forms that speak across cultures and time, and that we already know them before we see them. Do you think that maybe you're also tapping into some sort of archetypal human experience in the paintings?
I think you can. Cinema's tapped into that for quite a while in some aspects of it, and I think that can come across in what I pick, yeah. I mean, the forest one is about three men getting lost on a camping trip, and that's a very primeval fear. And I think, you know, that comes across, but that could be from the art director who made the film, you know, and that's where I find what I do a bit more interesting is that it comes from somewhere else, but it does tap into something. I mean, all these films tap into something, and that's what I'm jumping on.
I suppose what it all boils down to is that as a species, we just keep telling ourselves the same stories in different ways.
Yeah, they're telling them again today, same ones.
The fairy tales get repeated.
Foreigners are bad, you know. You know.
Yeah. So they get used to nefarious ends, is what you're saying. I think talking about other people's minds and voices, it might be a good idea to open up the room to some questions, if you have any, or comments. I think I'd also like to draw attention to the fact that speaking about the social and the shared experience is that there's two people
Yes.
being exhibited here at the moment.
Yeah, which is yeah, I think it's the only case of a solo show where somebody else is involved. Lauren is, well, I'm a formal mentor to her now, and but our relationship began. I bought a piece of her work, and we got to know each other, and then she said, "You tried to formalize the."
Would you take me on?
Yeah, take you on. And so then when I was going, I just thought, well, where's it going to go? So I said, why not? I was thinking kind of like the Douglas Hyde Gallery, Gallery 1, Gallery 2. I said, why not use the window? And it works great. There's no ego clashes or anything. It's just, and I like what she does. I think I like the fact she uses other people in her exhibitions and things. And in a way, this speaks about it as well, having her here. She uses her brother's work and stuff in it.
It's a similar approach. I mean, different sources, but similar approaches to painting. And I guess it's also about paradoxically, although you're avoiding expressionism, you're still revealing something about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your reference to Dutch painting as well, we've never fully touched on it in our own conversations. But yeah, it's nice to hear it as well. It's not
It all
similarly in the back.
slots in, yeah. But I went to your first show, that's how.
Yeah. In Urban Studios, just
Yeah.
the keys there, still holding on at the moment. Yeah. So it's I'm not going to interrupt your show.
No,
too much towards you, but yeah, really small.
But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting idea to have somebody else. Might be a good idea to do it again.
Yeah. We'll talk about that.
Not you.
I think actually, Steve, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
While we're here, you were mentioning. I think I've seen a lot of the work that would have been potentially produced for the show.
Yeah, you saw some of the cancelled ones.
Yeah, exactly. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit more about that process of curation and selection of work? Because in the back of my mind, I've seen other works that didn't quite make the cut and stuff.
Yeah.
Alongside.
Well, it's just that when you work that long on an image, you begin to realize that it's going to become a part of something. But like, there's a big painting, the skull that's in my studio, and I just stopped it at about the 99% end of things because I just knew it wasn't going to work. It was too cliched, and just said no. It's a large painting of a skull. It's actually a skull made into a ashtray, but it just wasn't going to work, and I knew it wasn't. I just stopped it. As to why I made that decision, because that was the first painting, I don't know. I just knew it was too cliched, I think.
Talking about skulls, I'm curious to hear your opinion on Jonathan Glazer's latest film, Zone of Interest.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I think it's fantastic. It's
Because it's also a sequence of still images.
Yeah. Again, it needs to be seen in the cinema for those rushes of colour and bleached out scenes and everything. Yeah, he's right up my alley. I love Under the Skin and all that stuff. It definitely speaks to me.
Some more questions?
Nobody ever asks us.
Thanks very much, this has been very good. When you were talking about the piece behind you, we spoke about the frame, the still that was wrong and how it was suggested, and you said it could have been when you paint it becomes something else, and then it becomes something else, and then at another point in the conversation, when we were talking about this, I like that notion of you being very selective for it. You expressed that very well. There's a selection on show here, and in that selection, there's hiding this kind of this personality. There's a lot of you in that.
Yeah.
I think that's very successful. But I think that there's something that we haven't kind of got at, which is what does that become?
Yeah.
When it stops being a frame and you use it, and you turn it into, in this case, a print, I think.
Yeah, it's actually a drawing, an iPad drawing made into a digital print.
But not just this one. I suppose I'm asking like a more fundamental question. You can tell me to go away if you want. But what does it become? And in the paintings, what do they become?
Well, it's a bit like watching The Zone of Interest. It becomes a kind of a dead, intangible thing, or it's art. It's in a gallery, and it's taken from a film. It's deadened out. And what is it Frank Stella said? Frank Stella said, "It is what it is, or what you see is what you see." And you can take whatever you want from it.
But he also said that, something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, about, it being an artist, it's like handwriting, right?
Yeah.
So it is kind of a form of expression, even though it's not expressionistic.
Yeah,
it's saying something.
as I said, I could just do a print of the still. So yeah, it's the art that comes into it.
Are you inferring that the image becomes something else when it's...
I'm not inferring anything. I just want to hear Stephen kind of talk about what it becomes to him. And I know it's a very frustrating question, and it's an appropriate answer. It becomes the art.
Yeah.
Shut up. But in the use of paint, maybe, like at the beginning of this conversation, it was obvious that you dislike the idea of being referred to or associated with photorealism.
Yeah.
Understandably, maybe. But what is that slightly quirky was your word? Tense. Tense is the way I describe the way they're painted.
Yeah.
Kind of infuriatingly particular.
Yeah, there's a kind of a, what was the word? I can't remember. Somebody used it. I can't remember. But yeah, there's a kind of a, like I'd have to go back to films and check things are right and that kind of thing.
Well, they're kind of obsessively meticulous.
Yeah, but they're not.
But then they're
photorealist.
not. And sometimes I think the pleasure in the paintings lies in the slight failings, because that for me also is.
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's perspective problems and all sorts of things going on, but
that's what makes them special images.
Yeah, that makes them different. Yeah, but it's not. I mean, they're photographic images to begin with, so there's going to be that element in them anyway at the start. So are you happy, or are you still?
No, I don't have an answer to my question. I was just hoping to stimulate a bit more.
I think the question could be applied to what happens to anything when you paint it.
Yeah.
It's a mysterious, great question, but there's no answer.
Yeah, I agree completely. And different artists will have a different take on what it means. That's why.
Yeah.
But there's a careful and beautifully accomplished finish to parts of paintings that are often wonky and weird in other ways. So there's a lot of really interesting contradictions in terms of how they come about as paintings.
Yeah.
So I thought I was kind of one of the things I was wanting to throw into the mix.
Okay.
I think painting is still tasked with a huge amount of pressure that other media in the 21st century is not. Firstly, it's assumed that it holds this kind of indexical relationship with the person who made it, when it often doesn't. And also there's this kind of suggestion that the gesture itself holds a certain kind of authenticity or meaning, which I think has come to be not true anymore. I often think about that. It's like you're in a room of paintings, it's kind of assumed that there's a truth or a certain meaning that you can get from them, when in fact they are often, I think you said dead images, not me, but that's kind of what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a certain amount of leeching as well. but the painting still instilled some of that as well, you know, the flatness.
Since no one else can be convinced to contribute to the conversation, I'm going to say thank you and good night.
And I can go now. Thanks a lot. Well done.
Thank you.